All right, today we're going to tackle a question that comes up all the time for anyone diving into a home lab or a small business network. How do you actually get a powerful FortiGate firewall and a server workhorse like a Dell PowerEdge to play nice together? Let's dive right in.
So a lot of people kick things off by asking a question, just like this one. The idea of kind of putting the security appliance inside the machine you want to protect, well, it seems logical, right? And you know what? It's a fantastic question because it really cuts to the core of how these devices are actually designed to work.
Well, the short and sweet answer? It's a no. You just can't physically slot a hardware box, like a FortiGate 60D, inside another hardware box, like a Dell R720 server. They're totally separate machines. But hold on, that is definitely not the end of the story. The real question, and what most of you are probably trying to figure out, is how do you get these two powerhouses to talk to each other and work together to build a secure network? And that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
Okay, so here's the game plan for this explainer. We'll look at the three big scenarios people really mean when they ask this, from the common physical setup to virtual firewalls and the data center view. And then we'll wrap it all up with some absolutely essential pro tips you won't want to miss.
You see, that first question, it kind of unpacks into three different scenarios. So let's get into what people usually mean. Okay, so first up, you've got the most direct approach, physically plugging a FortiGate box right into your Dell server. Pretty simple. Second, and this is cool, you can actually run the FortiGate firewall as a piece of software, a virtual machine, right on the server itself. And third, we'll look at how the big guys do it in larger setups, using a central network switch. We're going to hit all three.
All right, let's kick things off with scenario one, the physical connection. Honestly, this is the one you're going to see most often in home labs or small offices. It's the classic starting point for a reason. So just look at how logical this flow is. It's super simple. Traffic comes in from the internet, goes through your ISP modem, and bam, it hits the FortiGate first. Think of the FortiGate as the bouncer at the club. It's the firewall, the router, the security guard, all in one. Nothing gets to your Dell server until it gets past this guy. The server stays safe and sound behind that wall.
Okay, so how do you actually hook this all up? It's a pretty straightforward six-step process. First, you plug your internet cable into the FortiGate's WAN port. Easy. Then you run another cable from one of the FortiGate's LAN ports over to a network card on your Dell server. After that, you'll log into the FortiGate's web interface, set up its internal network, tell your server how to grab an IP address, and then, the final piece, you create a simple rule that basically says, hey, let my server talk to the internet. That's it.
And this is a perfect example of what that LAN configuration looks like inside the FortiGate. We're setting its own internal address to 192.168.10.1. That makes it the gateway for your server, basically the front door to the internet. We're also flicking on the DHCP server, which acts like an automatic address giver, handing out IP addresses to any device that connects, including our Dell server.
Okay, once the networking is set, you need to tell the firewall what to do. And that's where this policy comes in. It might look simple, but it's incredibly powerful. All it says is, anything coming from our internal network, our LAN, and trying to go to the internet, our WAN, just let it through. The accept action does just that. And that little NAT toggle, that's the magic that lets your server, with its private little IP address, talk to the whole wide world on the public internet.
All right, let's switch gears to scenario number 2. This one gets interesting. What if you don't have a physical FortiGate box? Well, you can actually run the firewall as a virtual machine, or VM, right on your Dell server. Yeah, the protector is actually living inside the very thing it's protecting.
So, what's the real difference here? Well, a physical box is its own dedicated hardware, right? It's simple, performance is guaranteed. A virtual appliance, on the other hand, runs as software. It's sharing the server's brainpower and memory, its CPU and RAM. Now, this is super flexible, but it does mean you need to install a special OS on your server first, called a virtualization platform or a hypervisor. You've probably heard of them, things like VMware ESXi or Proxmox.
Okay, and for our last scenario, let's zoom way out and look at this from a data center perspective. When you're dealing with big racks full of gear, the way you connect things changes a bit. See, in a real data center, you almost never plug a firewall directly into one server. Instead, everything, the FortiGate, the Dell server, all the other servers, plugs into a central device, usually a top-of-rack switch. This switch is like a traffic director for the whole rack, managing the flow of data between everything.
So how does that one switch keep all that traffic separate and secure? Well, it uses a clever trick called VLANs, or virtual LANs. You can think of it like creating separate, invisible networks, all on the same physical switch. So you can have one VLAN just for your servers, another for your regular office computers, and maybe a totally separate one for any public-facing services. It's a really powerful way to slice up your network for security without buying a bunch of extra hardware.
All right, we've walked through the 3 main ways to set this up. Now let's get into some pro tips that apply no matter which path you choose. This is the stuff that helps you do it right and, more importantly, do it securely.
We touched on this a minute ago, but NAT, Network Address Translation, is so fundamental it really deserves its own moment in the spotlight. This is the core process that lets your whole internal network, with all its private 192.something addresses, go out to the internet using just a single public IP address from your provider. Seriously, without NAT, your server just wouldn't be able to get online.
Now, let's talk about your Dell server. It probably has multiple network ports on the back, right? Well, it's a really good idea to use them for different things. For example, dedicate one port for your main network traffic, use another one just for server management, like Dell's iDRAC, which is a lifesaver that lets you manage the server even when it's off, and maybe even a third for a storage network. Separating things out like this is great for both performance and security.
And look, please, please, please don't skip these security basics. It seems obvious, but always use a strong admin password. Always manage your firewall over a secure HTTPS connection. And here's the big one, never allow management access from the internet side. That's like leaving your front door wide open with a sign that says, "Come on in." And of course, take regular backups and turn on logging so you can see what's going on.
You know, we can talk about theory all day, but there is absolutely no substitute for getting your hands dirty. The single best way to really wrap your head around all this is to just roll up your sleeves and build your own lab.
And this right here is a killer recipe for an amazing learning lab. You start with that physical FortiGate protecting your Dell server. Then, on the server, you install what's called a hypervisor, that special OS we talked about, like ESXi or Proxmox. Once that's running, the sky's the limit. You can spin up virtual machines for anything. A Windows server to learn Active Directory, an Ubuntu server to host a website, even a Kali Linux machine to practice your security testing. You can build an entire enterprise IT environment in just one box.
So there you have it. We've laid out the how and the why. You've got the architecture, you've seen the configurations, and you know the best practices. The only real question left is, now that you have this framework, what cool stuff are you going to build?